Player numbers are not something we hear about very often when it comes to Elite Dangerous. Aside from the numbers available on Steam charts, the available information for this is extremely slim. So the new information gives us some insight into the number of active players, as well as the expectations on sales for Odyssey, and the report also references many of the features that will be available in Odyssey. All of this info comes from a report made by Liberum, Frontier's official stockbroker. Some of the key points have been summarised on Reddit, and that thread is linked below. Of most interest then is the number of active players. The report places this at 500,000 active monthly players who log into Elite at least once per month. This does not include the players who recently joined the game via the free copy on the Epic Store, so it's reasonable to assume that the real number is actually higher than 500,000 monthly players. We know from previous reports that 4 million copies of Elite have been sold, and that a further 8 million copies were distributed during the free week on the Epic Store. That puts Elite at a comfortable 12 million copies. Now, the report puts some expectations on the number of copies Odyssey is expected to sell. This is placed at 1 million copies within the first year on both PC and console. More on that in a moment, because firstly, I want to focus on these player numbers. So, numbers themselves are of course somewhat meaningless, especially to those of us outside the company. So I've certainly kept that in mind here. But a reasonable way perhaps, although certainly not the best way, to get a feel for what these numbers actually mean is to compare them to another game. In March of 2020, VentureBeat interviewed Hilmar Pettersson, CEO of CCP, the developers of EVE Online. The interview was very broad and covered many different subjects, but one very specific question is relevant to us here. GamesBeat asked, what's the total user base now? The answer? The monthly active user base for EVE is 300,000 people. Now, what does this mean? What does this number actually represent in terms of growth? To put some context on this, here's some more information from Hilmar. There's been a big boost in the daily registrations for EVE this year, that's 2020. We have about 100,000 people logging into EVE for the first time this year, which is double what it was in January a year ago. Certainly, we've improved the new player introduction into EVE. It's a lot better than it used to be. We've also been changing our tactics in getting the message out about EVE Online. Now, in the current situation with a lot of people at home, we're seeing an increase again. If I look at yesterday, we have had more than 10,000 new registrations for EVE in a single day. That's quite impressive. Now, keep in mind that all games are different, so what may be an impressively healthy number for EVE might not necessarily translate in quite the same way to Elite. However, also keep in mind that at this point, EVE Online is rapidly approaching being 20 years old. So not only has it managed to survive this long, but also has managed to grow its player base even still. It's fair to point out, however, that the revenue model for EVE Online is very different to that of Elite. An earnings call made in August of 2020 by Pearl Abyss, owners of CCP, revealed that the EVE IP generated $28 million in revenue for the first half of 2020. That's a huge amount of money by any standards. By comparison, according to Frontier's 2020 financial report, Frontier generated £79 million, that's $109 million in the entirety of their 2020 financial year. 60% of that revenue came from Elite, Planet Coaster and Jurassic World. Unfortunately, there's no direct breakdown on precisely how much money came from Elite Dangerous itself. But that said, the financial side of things isn't the point of this video, but I did want to point all of that out, put that information out there, as I know people will certainly bring it up. Now I could go on and make some comparisons to other games out there, but comparisons are not really the main focus of this video. The comparison to EVE was simply to get a feel for what the number of 500,000 players might mean for the game. One method previously of finding out player numbers on the game has always been to check out Steam charts. Now, Steam charts does get a fair bit of flack from some very niche areas of the community as being unreliable, but in general I feel that flack is unwarranted. Sticking to EVE Online for a moment, Steam charts shows a daily peak of around 5,700 players. Now we know that not everyone plays EVE via Steam, so that only gives us a small insight into the overall numbers. Fortunately, we can see the overall player base in EVE. The EVE Offline website provides tracking based upon the official figures available from the game, and this shows a daily peak of around about 31,000 players. If we actually zoom out on Steam charts, as well as EVE Offline, we can see that the 1-year view highlights more or less the exact same trend. With Elite Dangerous then, we can see the daily peak is somewhere between 11,000 and 13,000 players. Of course, as with EVE Online, not all players play Elite through Steam, so obviously this is just a percentage of the overall player base. However, it will show the trends in player numbers. That trend overall speaks for itself. All in all, the information is generally very positive for both Elite Dangerous as well as Odyssey. The report places emphasis on the new features in the update that focus on exploration, planet tech, social hubs and FPS combat. Player mobility is also specifically referred to as a feature. Now, player mobility in this case is the ability for players to get around the galaxy. In Odyssey, Frontier want to make this as easy as possible for players who prefer the on-ground aspects. To enable this, ships will have a new optional auto-land feature, allowing ships to automatically land on surfaces in a similar manner to how the current docking computer works. Secondly, the Apex system will allow players to travel around the galaxy on board taxis. Hence, people will be able to get from A to B without even needing to own a ship. It seems to me then that the focus of Odyssey is almost certainly to expand the current game world and bring new content to the existing player base. But on top of that, Frontier want to attract a new audience that may not necessarily be primarily attracted to spaceships, but rather FPS. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.